So I'm joined by Abby Coleman from Precision Hydration today. Abby, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
No worries. Abby's going to join us to have a discussion around hydration and how specifically triathletes can look at their hydration needs and how they can incorporate into their training and also into their racing. Abby, can I just ask sort of the background behind the company? What specifically is your role within the sector?
Yeah, absolutely. So Precision Hydration it was founded by Andy Blow, who was a sports scientist in his younger years. He did his degree in sport and exercise science, and then he went on to be the sports scientist for the Formula One teams Renault and Benetton. Did that for a number of years, and through that kind of got a contract to open a human performance center for Porsche, the driving the cars at the Silverstone F1 circuit. And out from that human performance center grew Precision Hydration, and that all kind of came about from the fact that Andy himself was a very, very good triathlete in his younger years, and he found that he could perform very well in cooler conditions, but come hotter days, longer events, Ironman distances, and he just fell apart. And what he was very aware of was that he had a very big sweat rate. That was very obvious that he sweated a lot, but what he wasn't aware of was his sodium losses and the fact that in his sweat he was very, very salty. And fortunately, it was through his work at the Porsche Human Performance Lab that he came into contact with a doctor, and the doctor made him aware of the fact that this might be the case. And this was completely new to Andy. He had no idea that it was such a thing, that different people lost different amounts of sodium in their sweat, and you could be salty or you could not be salty. And so the doctor sent him for the sweat test. It was recognized, and Andy will say himself that it was like night and day between not taking on enough salt and suddenly supplementing and matching what he was losing, and his performance greatly improved, and suddenly he was able to maintain that performance in hot conditions. So that was kind of where the sweat test came from, and the ideas of the business. And Andy recognized that this had such a big effect on him and his own performance, and perhaps there was others out there as well that it might be useful for. So that's where the business grew from. We're now a team of 10 people, so we've come a long way. My role particularly is as the sports scientist. So I do a lot of work consulting athletes, sweat testing, more on the research side of things. I work with quite a lot of our ambassadors looking at their kind of fueling and hydration, because the two go quite hand in hand. So I do quite a lot of work on that side, and just lend a hand all over, really. It's very varied job, and every day is different.
Oh, brilliant. You mentioned about athletes, or Andy specifically. He was a big sweater, let's put it that way. And it's definitely something that I've noticed within the various clubs that I train with, and the various other people. And you can go out on a run, for example, and it could be a 5-mile run, and some people just don't seem to sweat at all, and then there's other people, and I'm probably one of these as well, who's absolutely dripping at the end of it. So some of that science behind whether you're a sweater or not, if you are a big sweater, does that necessarily mean you lose salt at a higher rate, or is it a bit of a mixture?
So it varies, definitely at a higher rate, but it's the two factors we've got to account for. So certainly if you're someone that sweats a lot, like yourself, Andrew, a big volume sweater, you run the risk of having a greater net loss of sodium loss, because you're simply losing more.
Yeah.
But we have to boil it back a little bit and look at the concentration of that sweat. So we found from our advanced sweat test, which maybe we'll talk a bit more about in detail, because I understand that people will be listening to that and thinking, what the hell is she on about?
Yeah.
From the advanced sweat test, we know that some people, like Andy, are super salty and may lose around up to 2,000 milligrams of sodium per litre of sweat. And some people are not salty at all and may lose as little as 200 milligrams of sodium per litre of sweat. So there's almost like a tenfold difference. And in truth, that is very much like a bell-shaped curve. And so a lot of people fall around that kind of moderate region in the middle, but it is a widespread, and we've seen people right the way across. So you've got to look at the concentration of the sweat and then how much sweat they're losing. And Andy was a double whammy in that he was really salty and a really heavy sweater.
Yeah.
But you could be salty and not sweat a lot at all. So your net loss might be somewhere in the middle, or you could not be salty, but you could be a really big volume sweater. Yeah. And so again, your net loss could be somewhere in the middle. And so that's why you have to look at everyone on kind of an individual basis. And we go down the line of personalizing hydration, because no two people are the same. You might be doing the same event, you might be the same fitness level, but actually your hydration needs could be very different.
Which would bring us on then nicely to your sweat test. And without me, putting words into your mouth here, give us a background to what it is. What does it entail, and how can people get access to it?
Yeah, so the advanced sweat test was actually originally a diagnostic tool in medical terms for the condition cystic fibrosis. So people that suffer from cystic fibrosis, they don't have a protein in their sweat gland, and they lose, extortionate amounts of sodium. They're like right at the upper end of the continuum. And so the test was used to recognize that. That's obviously a symptom of CF. So the test recognizes that. We brought it into the sporting world. And although it sounds like when you say sweat test, you think you've got to go and jump on a treadmill and run for an hour and get super sweaty. And that is one way of doing a sweat test, is like patch testing. Yeah. Our test is very, very different in that it's just 2 electrodes placed on the forearm. It uses a method called pilocarpine iontophoresis, which sounds really technical, but it's just 2 electrodes. We run a current through it. It has a chemical on one of the discs. It induces the sweat glands to start contracting, so you begin to sweat on one spot very concentratedly. We then get a sweat collector. It's like a disc. We pop it on that spot. It may take around 20 minutes for you to sweat into the back of the collector. It has tubing inside, and you can see it fill. Once we've got enough of a sample, we unwind the tubing and we run it through our analyzer. So the whole process takes around 40 minutes, and then we have a consultation with people and talk them through their results and their strategies off the back of that. As to where they can get that done, we have a number of sweat test centres around the globe now. We're very fortunate in that. So if you head on to our website, you can find that information there. But obviously with the current situation, the advanced sweat test is a little bit off the cards.
Yeah.
So we do have an online sweat test, which is probably the second best thing right now. And again, people can find that on our website.
Yeah, and this is the sweat test that I'm more familiar with. So yeah, again, talk us through what the online test does. And there's probably, I think, for those thinking about hydration and how they really have a strategy around replacing salts and sodium and various other things within their body, it's probably what I would suggest to be their first port of call to try and understand what they are as regards to their sweat rate and things. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about the online test?
Sure, and I'd agree. I'd say that is a really good starting point. Not only because of the current circumstances we're in, but it gets them thinking about their hydration and their own needs. So the online test is a series of questions. It's about 10 questions, which everyone that does the advanced test also conducts them questions. So where the online one grew from was the fact that we'd done all these advanced tests that had also done the questions, and we were starting to see correlations between what people thought they were and what they actually were. Mm-hmm. And so we then had the data analysed, a paper got published that showed that there was good correlation between them two. And so we got to the point where we felt confident enough to just have people do the online test, because we understand that it's not feasible for everyone to get down to a centre. So it meant that anyone anywhere could take the sweat test and start trialing the products confidently on the online test. So that's where that grew from. It's 10 questions. It asks things like, what is your sweat rate like? Questions about what activities they do, you know, about their training. Is that done in a hot condition, or how much of their training is done in a hot condition? Do they think they're on the salty side or not? And that's a tough question. People are often like, oh, how do I know if I'm salty or not? And there's some indicators, you know, if you're someone that ever sees white marks on clothing, or, you know, helmet straps and things, or caps, that's quite a good indicator of someone that's losing a lot of salt. Or if you really feel it stinging your eyes to the point where it's quite uncomfortable, or feel crusty. It sounds a bit gross, but that for me is my sign that I'm on the salty side. And when I dry off afterwards and I rub my face and I can feel crusty. So another one, which is perhaps a little bit more controversial, but if someone's suffering from muscle cramping a lot, that can be quite a sign of being on the higher end.
Why is that controversial? Because that's something that I automatically assumed with lack of salt within the body.
Yeah,
and always calves. It's always the calves that seem to get it. I don't know if other areas are more prone as well.
No, the calves are the worst, aren't they? It's like being shot.
Yeah.
No, so it's a little bit more controversial because the research is hard to do. You know, anecdotally, we feel pretty confident saying that, you know, if someone's reporting that they're a big volume sweater, they feel like they're salty, they do Ironmans in hot conditions, and it's in the latter stage of a race that they're cramping, you know, they're all signs to us that, okay, this really could be an electrolyte deficiency. And we've had so many people that when they start supplementing and have a better hydration plan and strategy, have such success, and they can, you know, stave off that cramp, that we feel confident that there's definitely something in that.
Yeah.
And I'd say around sort of 50%, you know, a big proportion of the possible causes of cramp is probably electrolytes and dehydration issues, but there are certainly other ones that can't be disregarded, such as, you know, a lack of conditioning can be a cause of cramp. If you just pushing the body too far, cramp is kind of like the body putting the brakes on. If you're overstretching and overworking a muscle beyond its kind of limit, the body will just say, no, we're going to stop this. So that's definitely a cause sometime. But glycogen depletion has also been thrown out there as a possible one. A biomechanical issue is quite common on the bike. If your bike setup is incorrect, and again, a muscle is getting worked inappropriately. But them kind of factors I mentioned at the start of this bit, if it's any of them kind of things are cropping up, then certainly it could be an electrolyte deficiency thing. But it's controversial because we've not got that one paper that you can bang on the table and say that proves it, because cramping's really hard to study. You know, trying to get someone to cramp in a lab is not easy.
And it's really interesting that you say about you know, pushing the body too far, and I do believe that, and most athletes, but definitely triathletes do this, that when they step up their training, because maybe they go in a little bit further, maybe they're trying to play catch up after an injury, or maybe they're just ramping up because it's that time of the season where they need to increase the training, and a lot of triathletes will push too far too soon. And we often get it on the channel here that people ask, you know, how do I increase my training effectively? And, you know, sometimes there's not always an answer to that, other than, you know, looking at their training plan and being gradual. You know, someone asked us yesterday on social media, can I train for a 100-mile running race with only 4 weeks preparation? And I did have to laugh, because the answer is no. unless you're already at that fitness where you're ready for a 100-miler. Because even if you were marathon fit, maybe, just maybe, you could push it to it, but that's ridiculous. But anyway, I think what I'm trying to get is, a lot of triathletes are pig-headed. They often try and push too hard too soon without fully understanding their bodies. And again, this is another reason why I wanted to do this particular podcast. The one thing I was going to say, and I forgot to mention a little bit earlier, when you're talking about sweat marks and when you're talking about being a heavy sweater, what I find is when I run, I sweat heavily, but on the bike, probably because I've got that wind that's drying me constantly, I don't always notice my sweat rate unless it's a really hot day. And it's not until I come off the bike then that you look at your chin strap, you look at your helmet, and it's white. And again, you said you can sort of feel it on your skin, and it's quite abrasive, and that's obviously, I'm assuming, the salt within your sweat.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've hit the nail on the head really with what you've said, Andrew, in that on the bike you've got that constant airflow, which that air moving across the skin helps better evaporation, which is ultimately what sweat is. The sweat, comes onto the skin, and it's the evaporation of the liquid off of the skin that takes heat with it, and that's how cooling works. With that more airflow, evaporation is increased, and on the run it perhaps sits on the skin a bit more. So,
and I find with the bike, bit of a double-edged sword, in the sense of you have the ability to take in fluids on the bike, because they're there, they're strapped to your bottles, cage, and things like that. So I found when I first got into triathlon, I had to set a little bit of a reminder to keep drinking. And I wasn't very good at it at the time, and maybe I would just take in water or some sort of tablet within the water. But I had to constantly remind myself to keep drinking. But when I'm on the run, I find that that's a little bit more difficult, because unless you plan for aid stations or family members, which technically you're not allowed to do if you're doing an official Ironman race and take anything off the crowd, it can be quite difficult to take in the salt. So one of the things I definitely want to ask around is strategy. But before I ask that question, another question I want to ask is, so why is it important? What is the science behind what a lack of salt and water within the body stops you from doing?
Yeah, great question. And we get this one all the time, because there's definitely people out there that come to us that haven't had a big blow up, like a big hydration problem. They've perhaps been getting away with stuff, and so the idea of having to take some stuff is like, well, why would I need to do that? And sort of things that you might see if you started to get low on sodium in a race would be, feelings of fatigue, which again hard to address because an Ironman is fatiguing either way. But other things would be, a lightheadedness or dizziness after an event is a dead common one of being low on sodium, being sodium depleted. Muscle cramping, again, as we already talked about, is an element of that. A loss of power. So what a big effect, which is perhaps where I should have started, is that when you get low on sodium is the main electrolyte in your blood plasma, in your blood. And sodium is really important in fluid balance. So water follows sodium. So when you've got plenty of sodium, your body retains more fluid. When you're low on sodium, you've got less fluid. So you've got a lower blood plasma volume, so less blood circulating around the body. And blood is obviously hugely important when you're exercising, because it's what delivers oxygen to the muscles. It's what delivers to the skin for it to be drawn from sweat. And so it's huge in cooling. And so when you are low on sodium, low on blood plasma volume, and there's less blood to go around, the demand is still there to be met. The skin is still crying out for blood, the muscles are still crying out for blood, and the heart has to step in to fill that demand. So if there's less blood to go around, the heart has to pump a lot harder, and you'll see your heart rate begin to drift. to meet that demand. Whereas if you stay well hydrated and with good sodium levels, then you maintain your blood plasma volume, and that demand is kind of more easily met. So it has a huge effect on thermoregulation as well. And that links quite closely into making sure you start these events well hydrated, because else you kind of cross that threshold where the body can't match its demand far earlier than if you go in well hydrated.
And I suppose, you know, you're just playing catch up. If you're already dehydrated before a race, you know, you're playing catch up from the very beginning. And
absolutely. And it's more common than you think. You know, there was a study done, and I think it was in 2016, across a load of different sports, males and females, different age groups, to see how many athletes were turning up to a training session dehydrated. And it was around a third. A third of people were starting exercise dehydrated, which is huge, because you're just starting on the back foot before you've even begun to sweat.
And I suppose one of the questions I should have asked at the very beginning is some of the terms that's used within the industry and the sport itself. And you know, we've used salt, we've used sodium, we've used the term electrolyte, and I suppose there's some confusion out there on what each of them are. And my understanding is salt and sodium is the same thing, and salt is an electrolyte. And are there other electrolytes, is my question.
This is a great thing to address, and actually I should have addressed it myself, because I've been using them a little bit interchangeably. So an electrolyte is a charged particle, a molecule with a charge, and that's sodium, it's calcium, it's potassium, magnesium. So there's numerous electrolytes in the body. Sodium is the one we focus on because it's the main one that you lose when you sweat, and it's the one that has the biggest effect on fluid balance. So whilst the other ones you lose them in very, very minor proportions, and not enough for them to kind of be performance limiting. You get enough from the foods you eat and things like that. So that's electrolyte, a charged particle. Salt is actually sodium chloride. So it's technically incorrect to say that salt and sodium are the same thing, although they are very frequently used interchangeably. So that's where the confusion comes from. And even more so on some electrolyte tablets out there. If you look on the nutrition table at the back, it won't list the sodium content, it will list salt. So it will say salt 0.5 grams, but salt is 40% sodium and 60% chloride. So actually the sodium content of that electrolyte tablet is more like 200 milligrams per litre. So I think that causes some confusion. And that's why in our own products, we literally have named them by their sodium content to be super transparent with how much people are taking. Because I think that's a real problem with some athletes, particularly if you're not familiar with hydration. If you ask someone, one, you know, how much is a good amount of sodium to be taking, they might not know. And two, if you ask them, well, how much are you taking at the moment, they might not know.
And I can put money on it, majority of amateur triathletes won't be able to answer any of those questions. That a lot of, you know, some of them would probably be using other brands, which you pop in a bottle with water and you make a bottle with electrolytes in it, let's call it that, and they'll just go off the letter of the law, I suppose, which is written on the back of the packet. And I suppose from our discussion now, that just shows that you need to have a little bit more sense behind it, or a little bit more science into what your personal needs are. So that's definitely something, you know, some of our listeners should take away, that, you know, if they can get online, at least try and understand what their sweat rate is by using your online test, that would be really beneficial to them.
Definitely, it's a good place to start. It's a good learning experience, and it all comes kind of back to self-awareness. And I think the more experience you have and the more trial and error you can do, the greater self-awareness you build, and you learn to be able to listen to your body's needs a little bit more and become more in tune. So whilst we encourage athletes to go into an event with a strategy and a plan, they need to build the confidence in having some flexibility within that based on the conditions on the day. So, no two races are going to be the same. The conditions will be different. The intensity you go off at will be different. Maybe your tactics will be different depending on, have they broken away in front of you, etc., etc. And so having a plan, and like you said on the bike, Andrew, you learned that you needed to be a bit more mindful with reaching for your bottle and making sure you were drink. That's a great example of that. Making sure you've got everything you could possibly need with you, and having a rough kind of plan of what you want to be taking and when. But through all your practicing and your training, you're super confident that should things change, you can kind of work on the fly a bit and tune into your body and listen to what it's needing and what it's telling you at that moment in time.
And one of the other things I think triathletes get confused, and athletes in general, I think, and when they first come into the sport, and maybe they don't come from a background where they've had to think about their hydration before, other than, like I said, a bottle of water, or maybe a popular sports energy drink during a football match, rugby match, or whatever they've played, is around the confusion often around fuel and hydration. And people will the people that I speak to anyway, will automatically say, it's all right, I don't need an energy gel because I've put this tablet in my water and that'll keep me going. Or the other way around, I don't need to take in any salt because my energy gel will give me everything I need. Is that something that you guys have come across, some of that confusion?
Definitely. We get questions on hydration and fueling all the time. And it is definitely confusing because you look at one product is claiming to give you everything you possibly need, and the next product looks the same, but it may only be electrolytes, and the next product along it might actually be a recovery drink and be full of proteins, so it can be very confusing. And the advice there would be, take a look at the back, get really interested in what you're putting in your body. They are certainly two different things. Ultimately, if you boil it down, when you're doing a prolonged piece of exercise or race, competition, whatever it is you're doing, you're going to start to need some calories, some fluids, and some salts. Now, how much you need on them three things will come down to personal and individual needs. But by keeping them kind of separate, or as separate as you can, this is what we typically advocate, particularly for endurance athletes and people that are racing in the heat. Keep your fluids and sodium in one bottle and get your fuels from, real foods or semi-solids, chews, bars, gels, that type of thing. It means that you have more control over all of these factors, and you can dial them up and down independently of one another, rather than opting for a kind of an all-in-one mix. It gives you energy, it gives you sodium, it gives you fluid, it gives you everything you're going to possibly need. You don't need anything else. You're a bit limited, and that can become a problem when you're doing these longer events, and particularly if it's hot, because if it's very hot, you get more thirsty. You're reaching for your bottle more and more frequently because it's more fluid that you require and perhaps more sodium, but you've limited yourself in that you can't take that fluid on board without getting them calories as well. And perhaps it's not them calories that you're needing at that time. And that can cause some real GI problems for people as well. Going back to that blood flow and that thermoregulatory effect of the skin crying out for more blood and the muscles still needing their requirement, the gut also gets some blood flow.
Yeah.
Now, when it's very hot, that blood flow is like extremely reduced because suddenly it's not as important as the skin or the muscles. And so when it's hot and blood's not passing through, that absorption rate from gut to bloodstream slows. And
okay. Well, that's
a high carb content drink slows that movement even more. So that's when you really want to be keeping your fluids hypotonic. They move quickest from gut to bloodstream, and fueling independently of that separately is the smarter move. But it's, again, something that people should trial. Go and trial it. I always say that, like, disclaimer, some people will get on really well with that all in one bottle, and there's time and places where them things are really effective, and on shorter stuff, on cooler stuff, that might be the way forward. And it sure is an attractive approach, isn't it, to just have one bottle on your bike.
Yeah.
So I can see why that works for some people, and I know plenty of athletes that is their go-to successful, robust plan. So
a majority of the people who listen to our channel, they aren't the top pros. So the difference between having one bottle on your bike against two bottles on your bike is probably going to be minimal. So and you make a really good point about trialing beforehand, and we're massive advocates on the channel about ensure that you try anything out in training before you race, because there's too many horror stories of people trying new things on race days, or go into an aid station on race day, finding out they don't have the product that they normally use, and disaster, whether that be stomach cramps, whether that be worse, whether that just being able not to stomach anything, so you end up not having any fuel. There's so many out there. Final question around that sort of fueling and hydration. We often talk about hitting the wall, or in cycling it's called bonking, that point where you just feel you have no energy, you can't go any further. And I often say to people, if you've hit that point, you've gone too far. You should have put something in your body, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour previous to that. And it's all about ensuring that you stay at a regular level. But that hitting the wall, I often just assume that with fuel. Can you also have that with dehydration as well?
Good question. Certainly it would be a different kind of hitting the wall. It's not talked about in the same way, is it? Everyone is familiar with that hitting of the wall on calories and fueling. I definitely think there's a drop off in performance when that level of dehydration becomes so severe that you'll start to see that loss of power, and that'll again come back to that lack of blood flow and blood volume, in that the heart is struggling to, the heart rate's at its limit, it's working as hard as it can to meet this demand, and there's just blood volume continuing to decrease, and eventually your performance will suffer, in that the heart rate can't account for this any longer, can't fill the void, and so it will drop off. Not in quite the same way as bonking perhaps, but it certainly will have a big effect on performance. One thing that, and maybe this is kind of going off on a little bit of a tangent now, but Andy talks very interestingly about an experience he had in Nice, and this was before he was aware of his extreme sodium losses. It was very, very hot in Nice. It was a big race for him. He'd made the GB squad, and he was super, hyper aware of the fact that he didn't want to get dehydrated. So he drank a lot the day before, he drank a lot the morning of, he got on the bike. What did he do? He drank some more, and he just kept drinking, and he was fueling really well, and he started to feel really rubbishy, like fuzzy headed, unwell. It felt, and this is his words, like he was bonking, but he knew he wasn't, because his fueling strategy was really, really good. He trialed it, he practiced it, and it was solid. So he thought, it's got to be hydration, I've got to be dehydrated. So he drank some more, and he essentially drank himself into the medical tent because he overdid the plain water, because that's all he was drinking. He wasn't.
Is that called hyponatremia or something like that?
Very close. Hyponatremia. Yeah. Very good. And so for anyone listening that isn't aware of that, that's low blood sodium levels. And essentially what Andy did was diluted his body's sodium stores so excessively that he got horrific cramping on that day, and made himself really ill. Because what you do is, when you put too much water into the bloodstream, you dilute them sodium levels, the body tries to counteract that effect by sucking that water up into its cells. So you probably become a bit puffy and you swell a little bit, but that can make you feel really rotten when that starts to happen in your head. And actually it can be fatal when that happens in the brain cells. And there have been many deaths from hyponatremia in the past, and it kind of grew from, there was an era around, you know, the sort of the 1990s, 2000s, where the hydration advice was drink as much as you can, you know, drink. And athletes being athletes, sort of like what you discussed, Andrew, with them pushing too hard and trying to do things too early.
Yeah.
You know, if you tell them to do a lot of something, they'll do, you know, a lot of something. They always take it too far, or more frequently take it too far. And so that was a big wake up call for Andy, and very, very scary. And I've forgotten how we got onto this tangent now, but I'm sure I was going to make a point. But
yeah, no, you've made the point, and it was actually one of my questions that I forgot to ask earlier about, you know, plain water. You know, a lot of people just say, oh, I'll just drink water, I'll be fine and things. But one of my points was then going to be about drinking too much water. And so, yeah, you made that point really valid. So from a product point of view, what can people take? And what specifically do you offer at Precision Hydration?
So if hydration is your sole aim, that's your focus, that's what you want to get out of your water bottle, then we'd encourage you to take an electrolyte tablet, because sodium helps hydration. It helps quicker absorption in the stomach, and it helps you to retain more fluid in the bloodstream, which is very, very helpful. So talking about our own products, we have 4 different strengths of electrolyte, and what we try and do is, off the back of either the advanced test or the online sweat test, is advise you on what's the right strength for you based on your losses. So how much are you losing, how much you need to put back in, and it really as simple as that. You know, it's a simple equation. And we have our pH 500 strength, which is not too dissimilar from other electrolyte tablets out on the shelves. If you look on the back, very similar sodium content. We've got then our pH 1000, which is about double the strength, and our pH 1500, which is about triple the strength.
Yeah.
And I think that can sound quite fearful to some people, you know, quite scary. You know, triple the sodium, triple the salt content, and that's perhaps why doing the online test and the advanced test is so useful. It's real confidence boost to see, well, actually, this is how much I'm losing. And once you see it all laid out for you, what you're losing, suddenly what you've got to put back in makes a lot more sense and is a lot more comforting.
Okay. And with regards to the sweat test and the products, what's the website? Where can people find out the information on it?
So our website is www.precisionhydration.com. So that's our online store, but also there's loads of blogs on there. So if anyone is kind of listening to this and we've not touched upon something, or you've got a question, that would be a great place to go and try and find that answer. If you can't find the answer on one of our blogs, then do drop us an email at hello@precisionhydration.com, and you'll get one of the team, and you'll get a real person reply to you, and they'll be able to point you in the direction and hopefully answer your question as well.
Brilliant. And I'm assuming the website shows you the locations of where you can do the advanced sweat test when we're out of lockdown, obviously. And
yes, absolutely. Unfortunately, no sweat testing at the moment. I'm missing it.
No worries. Right, Abby, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Hopefully, we might have you on in the future if we can find a topic which is that links to precision hydration. So, yeah, thank you very much, and we'll speak soon.
No, thank you. Bye, Andrew.